Hey everyone, it's me, Mr. Davitt. Some unfortunate news for me. I actually recorded this lecture earlier today and went to recheck it after I already uploaded to YouTube. And actually, shout out to Joe for letting me know that the audio didn't work. Some reason glitched out, or had the whole thing recorded. So now we'll start again. Hopefully, this time on the second recording, it's even better for you. So, if you recall from last class, we took a look at the descent into the Depression and the reasons why the Great Depression happened. We took a look at Herbert Hoover and his early attempts to fix the Great Depression, which we know were unsuccessful. And we saw the election of FDR in 1932, resounding victory. Today, what we'll do is we'll look at the actual New Deal and some of the specific programs that the New Deal had as a part of it in order to kind of fix the economy. And then next class, we'll kind of wrap it up, and then we'll take a look more closely at kind of examining and assessing the New Deal. Was it a success? Was it a failure? How should we judge it? And then we'll go from there. So let's take kind of a look at what's going to happen and why the New Deal takes place. So if you recall, March 4th, 1933, FDR takes over, elected in November, so 4 months later, takes the office. And there's really no delay. So much is FDR committed to going to work almost immediately that he even cut some of his inauguration day festivities short so he can get to work. What he's going to do is he's going to call a special emergency session of the Congress in order to work on fixing the Great Depression and putting together this New Deal that he promised on the campaign trail. And just to kind of a heads up, the Congress that he has is a Democrat majority. And the reason I say that is because a lot of what he proposes, the Congress is really going to have no problem approving because there's partisan support. Also, FDR is going to be a pretty strong leader, probably our strongest president up to this point as far as using the executive office. So he's going to really kind of stretch his powers as the executive branch in order to get these things done. But either way, he has a very cooperative Congress. The passage of a lot of the New Deal legislation takes place in the first 100 days of FDR's presidency, so named literally the 100 days up until about mid-June. And we'll start class today by kind of examining specifically a lot of the 100-day New Deal legislation. So these are a lot of the programs that are going to come out almost immediately in order to try to fix the hopelessness, fix the unemployment, help circulate more money into the economy. So that's going to be a big part of this. When we talk about the New Deal programs, and hopefully you saw this when you were completing your work, a lot of them have acronyms. So many times when we talk about them, we refer to them as the alphabet agencies. And so it's really important that you're able to kind of distinguish your acronyms together. At the same time, we have some acronyms that we use when we're talking about the goals of FDR when he launches the New Deal, and those are the 3 R's. And what are the 3 R's? First off, relief, second, recovery, and then third, reform. We'll look at these a little more closely as we move through, and it's important to realize a lot of the New Deal legislation does not necessarily fit so comfortably into one of the categories. A lot of them, there's a lot of overlap and things like that. But what you want to realize is relief is a lot of your immediate things, put people to work immediately, get money into people's pockets immediately. Recovery is more kind of like your short-term stuff, try to fix up the economy, get the economy back in kind of that upward direction. And then your reform programs are designed in order literally to try to reform the system and try to make sure that you're never going to have another Great Depression again. And actually, a lot of the reform programs that were established in the New Deal in the 1930s still exist today. So we'll look at that as we continue on here. This is a very famous quote from FDR's inauguration. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Trying to really soothe the Americans. Again, a lot of uncomfortability, a lot of anxiety, a lot of panic about what had happened. So this is just trying to kind of ease them and make them feel more comfortable and kind of better about their current situation. Here's a look at FDR and Hoover on the day of the inauguration. And by the way, when I found this picture, I thought to myself, let's take a look at the presidential ratings comparing Hoover with FDR. And you can see here from both of these, FDR usually ranks as usually our third top president behind Washington and Lincoln. Sometimes he cracks into the two, but usually he's number three. Again, very respectable. And then you can see where Hoover sits, 36. And then if you look at this other one, 34, 36, stuff like that. So Hoover, never willing to commit that much as far as plan in order to fix the depression, so he always ends up a little bit further down. FDR definitely a very public president, and this is him signing some of the 100-day legislation. And again, these are a lot of really impactful programs that are going to put relief into the economy almost immediately. A brief timeline just so you can see it of the 100 days, and we'll be talking a lot about these as we go through, but these are things that FDR thought were necessary in order to try to get the economy back on track. And I mentioned this before, but here are your 3 R's: your relief, your recovery, reform. A lot of overlap, but again, relief is basically almost immediately get money in people's pocket, get people employed. Recovery, more so stimulating the economy, trying to get things in the upward direction, so more kind of short term. And then reform is your long term stuff. Let's make sure we never have a Great Depression ever again. Okay, one of the big things that FDR is going to have to address are the banks. So this requires almost his immediate attention. So remember that the banks are in crisis. Many banks had failed, and the bank problem required immediate action. What FDR is going to do nearly immediately is he's going to establish a bank holiday where basically all the banks will close from March 6th to March 10th of 1933, so just 2 days after he takes office, and then the banks are to open after. And this is supposed to give him kind of some time to kind of think about what to do and kind of make sure the banks are on better track. What he's going to sign into law is going to be the Emergency Banking Relief Act of 1933. And the biggest thing that you want to realize here is that this is going to give the president the power to reopen previously failed and previously closed banks. And he does this because his hope is that once they're opened, people will go back to them. People will deposit their money. Well, that's a little more complicated because people had already taken all their money out of the banks. They had completely lost their faith in banks as a whole. Many banks had failed in the early parts of the Depression, meaning they had lost all their money. So FDR needed to do something in order to kind of soothe the fears of the people and make them feel comfortable about reinvesting their money. He's going to do so through the first of his many fireside chats. These are radio addresses, and this is the image you see here that FDR will give to the American people. And basically, his goal here is to, and again, each one's going to be different, but to just let the American people know he's on their side and kind of make them feel more comfortable and make them feel informed about what he's doing. And in this first fireside chat, he addresses the banks explicitly. And he says, you need to put your money into the banks. The banks are safe now, and they're much safer than putting money in your mattress, which is what most people were doing because they were so fearful of all their money being lost in the banks. When he tells people in this first fireside chat that the banks are safe, it will work well, showing really the confidence of the American people in FDR. And with that confidence restored, deposits will start to trickle into the banks. And so now all of a sudden, banks are going to have the money necessary in order for them to do their functions in order to survive. So loaning money to businesses and to people for homes, business operations and whatever else. So this is a really, really big step. And this is kind of one of the most critical things he needs to do almost immediately in order to move through the later parts of the New Deal. There's a couple other things FDR is going to do specifically in regards to money and banks. And one of the things he's going to do to try to make sure banks are on the right track, he's going to pass what's known as the Glass-Steagall Banking Reform Act. One of the biggest things this leads to is the creation of the FDIC, which is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And what this does, and actually still exists today, it's part of our reform type of programs, is it insures bank deposits. What had happened was before the creation of the FDIC, if you deposited money into a bank and the bank failed, you lost your money. So that obviously meant a lot of people did not want to invest their money into a bank. And if they did and the bank failed, there was no protection. But with the creation of the FDIC, bank deposits are insured. Therefore, once again, giving people that confidence they need in order to bring their money to the banks and invest them. If you have a bank, by the way, today, bank account, if you go to your bank, you'll probably see a sticker if you look, and it'll say it's FDIC because even today, the federal government through the FDIC insures bank deposits. Another thing, as far as money is concerned, is that remember that the United States was still on the gold standard, and similarly, people were hoarding gold because they were so worried about the money crisis and all those type of things going on. But that was no good. So what FDR did was through executive order, he ordered that anybody hoarding and keeping on to gold needed to surrender it to the Treasury and be given paper currency. And in doing this, he actually is going to take the country completely off the gold standard in order to kind of stimulate the economy and put more currency into circulation. The way in which this is going to be done and the way in which he's going to kind of incentivize people is he's going to increase the rate at which they buy gold. Before 1933, it was $21 an ounce. After this, he orders the Treasury to buy it at $35 an ounce. So now people would obviously be interested in giving up their gold in order to get paper currency. And this puts more money in people's pockets as well as more money in the overall circulation. So that always helps the economy because then more people are spending, meaning businesses are better able to operate and all those type of things. So that's really, really positive. Um, this will go on for a little bit. It will get some criticism because by taking the country off the gold standard, you're basically putting money into the economy as far as paper currency that's not necessarily backed. But at the same time, FDR sees this as being something really necessary and needing to be done. And even though the gold standard will come back for a little bit as far as international trade, the gold standard will officially be eliminated in 1971. And so this is the big step that needs to happen in order for the Depression to put more paper currency into the economy. This, by the way, a logo of the FDIC from 1933. This might be a sign that you would see if you've gone to your local bank and you see that your deposit insured up to $250,000 today. When the FDIC was created initially, it was like $5,000. So obviously things have dramatically changed. But obviously this is a big deal in that people now can feel more confident about investing money. And here, by the way, is part of this executive order that's going to come into place requiring people to turn in their gold for paper currency. Okay, the other major crisis that needs to basically be dealt with almost immediately is unemployment. Because by the time FDR took office, unemployment in the country was up to 25%. In some areas, it was way, way higher. But either way, 25% will be the largest in United States history. And whenever you don't have people working, it obviously means people can't afford food and they can't afford their houses. But it also means that people don't have anything to do. People grow frustrated. So you always got to make sure that you have jobs available. So FDR, similar to really what the New Deal is all about, is going to put federal money to work in order to solve the unemployment problem. The goal is twofold. Number one, obviously your biggest thing, get people employed. But the other thing is to get people employed doing projects and other things that are going to help improve the US's infrastructure and that type of stuff. So we're actually really going to see that throughout the New Deal, throughout the various job programs. They do have a specific purpose more than just getting people to work. So that's going to be important. And actually, by the way, a lot of the stuff that was created in the New Deal, as far as infrastructure and projects, still exists today. One of the first job programs that comes out, and one of the more popular ones, is the CCC, which is the Civilian Conservation Corps. This is a very interesting program limited to young men from the ages of 18 to 24 who are going to go live in government camps. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that the government sponsors their housing. They live in more rural areas of the country. And by the time the CCC ends in uh, early 1940, it would have employed 3 million people. So that's pretty strong. What's also interesting about this program is that it pays its people $30 a month. But because they're living in housing provided by the government, which they don't pay for, because they're provided with food and basically most of their expenses, the CCC requires that they send 25 of the $30 back home. And that's definitely significant because what that means is that these people are working, but then the money goes back home to their families, and now those people have money to spend. So it's a really smart initiative in order to get things together. As far as the type of work these people do, a lot of outdoors work, reforestation, flood control, even firefighters that are a part of this. But when we really think about this program, it is successful. It's going to give a really big feeling of purpose for these young men that are employed through this. And again, it's going to have lasting impact and lasting implications for what they actually do throughout the CCC. Here, by the way, an advertisement from Illinois CCC office asking and trying to get people to come in and be part of this program. And many young men will take advantage of that opportunity. I want to mention here a few other New Deal programs from the first 100 days, primarily, so you can see all the various things that FDR is going to go after in order to try to achieve the most success possible. So, one of the programs that's going to be created is the Federal Emergency Relief Act, or the FERA, under the direction of kind of one of FDR's right hand men, Harry Hopkins. And what this is going to do, well, it's a pretty big program, but it's going to provide immediate relief to the states, money, and it's going to give them to states and tells them, hey, look, give this to people living in your state. Now, it tells them basically you can either give it to them as direct payment, like kind of like unemployment benefits, welfare, or give it to them as wages so that they can work on some state project. And so that was kind of the goal of the agency as a whole, not just to give government handouts, but more so to use the money as wages for government projects or something like that. You see in this image people lining up in Phoenix in order to take advantage of the benefits of the program. Another program that's going to come out is another works program, which is the CWA, the Civil Works Administration. This one is a little bit different because it's actually only set to last during the winter of 1933 into 1934, which was a particularly harsh winter. And there's going to be, public works type jobs under this program during this tough winter. But basically, as soon as the winter is done, it's going to end. So it's kind of an interesting thing to look at there. However, they are involved in the construction of roads, schools, airports. So, again, lasting things there as well. Another one that's going to come out is the HOLC. This is the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Because a lot of people were not able to afford afford their mortgages. A lot of foreclosures were happening and things like that. So this is a way in which their mortgages are going to get refinanced specifically for non-farms. so they can make sure that they're able to stay in their house and not become homeless. So this is helpful for banks, but also very helpful for middle class families. So that's significant to look at there. Here, by the way, is a high school being created, construction wise at least, under the direction of the CWA. Here's some CWA workers, and here's a logo for the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Okay, there's going to be some people that come around during the New Deal that are basically going to argue the New Deal doesn't do enough. And it's a lot of their rhetoric that's very fiery that will kind of label these people as demagogues. And so I just want to acknowledge a few of these people and kind of explain the way that this is going to work. Again, as you can kind of see, based on the programs we discussed, there's a lot of early successes that come out of the New Deal. Yeah, not every program is perfect, but certainly providing some much necessary relief, loans, um, employment, fixing up the banks, etc. But some people felt that FDR was not doing enough. Some felt he was doing way too much, more conservative people. But some that were a little more left leaning and more liberal thought he should have been doing more. And so I'll just make a couple comments about some of these people. One is Father Charles Coughlin. He's going to be a priest out of the Midwest area, and he's going to go to the radio and attract about 30 to 40 million people and talk about the need for more kind of social justice measures out of the New Deal. That might seem nice, but his radio program will get out of hand and will start to kind of lose respect into late 30s, as a lot of what he was suggesting was anti-Semitic as well as pro-fascist. So no more Coughlin, but still at its peak, able to gain about 30 to 40 million followers on the radio. Next one you see here is a doctor actually out of the Long Beach area in California, Francis Townsend. And what Francis Townsend proposed was that for everyone over 60 years old in the country, to give them $200 a month. So again, an interesting proposal. Something kind of like this will get established a little bit later through a specific act of the New Deal. But at the time, again, kind of radical, not really a big plan into action how that's going to work. But either way, gaining some followers and getting some people that are interested, because who doesn't like $200 a month? Our most famous and kind of notorious New Deal demagogue is a guy by the name of Huey Long out of Louisiana, senator, governor of Louisiana. And his motto was that he wanted to make every man a king and basically look to completely eradicate social class distinctions within the United States. I'm going to show you some stuff about his program specifically, but what he wanted to do was basically take money away from the rich and use it in order to give every family $5,000, which is a pretty fascinating, proposal. But again, because of his ability to speak and this attractiveness, he will gain some followers. Originally, Huey Long was very supportive of FDR, but that quickly changed to harsh criticism, as he really did not think that FDR was doing enough in order to help the crisis out. And actually, Huey Long was mounting a campaign to challenge FDR for the Democratic nomination in 1936. That, however, will never happen, as Huey Long will be assassinated. Therefore, his big plan of to make every man a king going down the drain. That being said, all these guys, especially someone like Huey Long, pointed to something that definitely was drawing some concern within the United States, which was that authoritarianism was rising in the world. So the fear, that's in Germany, that's in Japan, Italy, Spain. And so the hope here was that that would not happen in the United States. With that being said, there's going to be kind of this overarching idea, and this will be really the way FDR kind of rules, which will be to still work within checks and balances in the Constitution, even though stretching that power a little bit, but still showing, that restraint. But realizing that these are times of crisis and the need for a strong leader absolutely necessary. This, by the way, is a picture of Townsend right here. This is Father Charles Coughlin. Here's Huey Long. Here's Every Man a King from Huey Long's Share a Wealth program. So again, really a very radical idea to basically almost eliminate social class distinctions entirely. And here you can see some more specifics on the Huey Long share of wealth proposal. But basically, you see limiting income, limiting inheritance, giving income to people, free college education, free training, free pensions, even limiting the work week to 30 hours so over uh, production can be prevented and workers can enjoy some of the luxuries of life. So, again, controversial type guy, a very radical program, very much a rabble rouser by all intents and purposes, but his vision cut short due to his assassination. Okay, I want to mention this program specifically. This is one of those programs that really is going to be quite successful, which is the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. This one is created after the first 100 days in 1935, and this program will use about $11 billion on primarily infrastructure, so building bridges, roads. There's not going to be just infrastructure specifically. For example, there was a project in Wyoming about counting crickets. There was other programs about like counting things in a specific area, which might seem bizarre, but at the same time, data the government's trying to acquire, and you have a lot of people that are unemployed, so why not do that? So really kind of interesting thing that comes about out of this. Another thing that was pretty cool and interesting about the WPA is going to be the creation of the Federal Art Project, which is actually going to hire former artists to create murals and posters, kind of showcasing people working in the New Deal. And similarly, the Federal Writers Project as well, hiring writers in order to do various writing projects and things like that. And I mentioned these two because I think sometimes when we think about the New Deal, we think these are just construction jobs and these are just like blue collar jobs. But something like WPA is saying, hey, look, we have people that are skilled artists, skilled writers. Why don't we use their skill not just to put them back to work doing anything, but put them to work doing something that they're really good at? So these two programs will especially gain some notoriety and certainly public support. So that's, interesting. All in all, the WPA is pretty long lasting. It will go till about 1943, and it will employ about 9 million people during its time. It's also important to realize that it's giving people jobs, but it's really a way in which people are able to gain self respect as they are part of, construction projects that will last for a long time. They create murals that are going to be hung up in government buildings and other things. So I think that's another really significant part of this. This is work that gives people purpose. Here, by the way, some construction going on, and we see the WPA sign there. This, by the way, is an image of early LaGuardia Airport. If you've been to New York, you might have flown into LaGuardia. LaGuardia is actually created as part of WPA construction. Here, by the way, is a mural from the Federal Artist Project, the WPA, once again commemorating the great construction and work going on by Americans during the New Deal. And this, by the way, another one, but depicting the farm aspect. And again, we'll get more into that in just a little bit. And here we see a guide to New York, and this one is created from the Federal Writers Project. And once again, you have all these writers, they're unemployed, so why not get them doing something meaningful and something that they're good at? So that's why something like this is significant to look at. I want to make a couple comments about women during the Depression, just briefly. A reminder that women and the early parts of the Depression did a lot of things in order to try to save money. If you remember, these are things like canning. in order to preserve food, things like sewing in order to save money on clothing, all necessary measures, especially in the bleakness and solutionlessness of the early Great Depression. Also, a lot of women will work during the Great Depression. Not all programs will include women. Like, for example, the CCC, you could not be a woman and work for that. But at the same time, other programs like WPA, for example, has openings and opportunities for women. And the other thing you want to realize is because money is so tight, you really can't not work. It can't be one of those things, oh, I'm a woman, I need to take care of the house. Well, no, everyone's got to work in order to pay the bills. So that's going to be out of the um, picture. Perhaps the most notable achievement for women during the Great Depression is going to be their work politically. And it really starts with this woman that you see here, which is Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt, FDR's wife, and by most intents and purposes, the most significant of any first lady throughout American history. And the reality is, for as supportive as she is as a wife to FDR, which is all really, really great, her big contribution is gaining public support for New Deal programs and kind of giving that influence in order to make that possible. And so, again, you have to realize as FDR is pushing through these programs, there's a lot of people that are somewhat skeptical. Is this program going to work? Is this program really accomplishing what it needs? And Eleanor Roosevelt is definitely someone that's going to be able to get more people, particularly women, to increase their support and approval of a lot of various New Deal legislation. So it's really, really significant to look at in regards to her contributions. Aside from just Eleanor Roosevelt, the FDR administration will also see our first female cabinet member, Frances Perkins, who will be the Secretary of Labor. Obviously, during the New Deal, being the Secretary of Labor is a very, very high position. And we're also going to see another woman who's Mary McLeod Bethune, and she's going to be the head of the minority affairs in the National Youth Administration, another program designated to help youth specifically get jobs and stay in school and all that kind of stuff. And she's going to be kind of the person behind that, making sure that there's opportunities primarily for black students and black youth in both education and vocational training. This, by the way, is Eleanor Roosevelt making a speech. Again, very public figure, sometimes right at, standing beside FDR, sometimes kind of paving her own path. This, by the way, is Frances Perkins, our first female cabinet member in United States history. And this is Mary McLeod Bethune. You see her in the background with some young African American youth. And again, she was tasked with a particularly hard goal, which was how to make sure that these programs were also benefiting minorities, in particular African Americans. Okay, another program that's going to ultimately fail, but intentions right and will lead to something later on is going to be the creation of the NRA. Today, when we think about the NRA, we think about the National Rifle Association. The NRA during the New Deal is actually the National Recovery Administration. And what this program is set to do is basically to try to help industry as well as help labor and workers and things like that by establishing codes of fair competition for each major industry, and then also to establish minimum wages across specific industries, and then maximum hours of a work week. So this is the idea that everyone operating within a specific industry would have all these same things together, therefore making things fair and kind of setting up a precedent for how things were to operate. The other thing that's really big, and we're going to see this later on, is the plan for the NRA was for workers not only to be able to operate within unions, but also to be able to choose their own union reps. Typically, before this, if the right to collective bargaining through unions was granted, it had to be done through representatives that were appointed by the company itself. And so this is a pretty big deal that they're going to give workers the ability to decide for themselves who they want to represent them. This was meant to get rid of all anti-union contracts, so to protect against people who decided to be within a union. And another thing that was really kind of the big rallying cry, and it's what you see here, is that this blue eagle became the symbol of the NRA. And if you were a business and you were an NRA member, you would post this up on your business and you would show people that you were a member of the NRA and you were doing your part in order to operate within the codes and, pay good wages and all the rest of those things. The reality is this will not really work out as planned. Not a lot of enforcement behind this. In addition, what we're going to see is a lot of violation of codes, in particular from business owners who would put up the eagle but then not actually participate and, abide by the codes, and so that's going to be kind of bad. The NRA will be shut down officially in 1935 by the Supreme Court, who are going to decide that Congress couldn't control local businesses. That was a violation of the federal government and their kind of rights. But the NRA would still be significant in that later on they're going to decide, hey, look, we still need to do something for workers. We still need to do something for industry. So even though this didn't work out, let's put something else together in order to make that happen. The Blue Eagle you see here, here's a local business putting up the NRA symbol. And again, the kind of idea behind this was everyone was going to do this. Didn't exactly work out, but again, later on we'll see something more substantial happen. Okay, another works project and jobs project that's going to be put to play is the PWA. This is the Public Works Administration. This one aimed more so at long-range recovery. And this program, all in all, will put together about $4 billion for about 34,000 different public works projects. So we're talking about public buildings, we're talking about highways, bridges, stuff like that. The reality is probably its most significant achievement was the creation of the Grand Coulee Dam, which will be the biggest man-made structure made since the Great Wall of China, so nearly 2,000 years before. There's going to be some contradictions to this dam, in particular that it provides electrical power to an area not really equipped with big industry, and it also is going to make possible a large areas, for irrigation at a time when the government was trying to get farmers to farm less, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. However, after World War II, with some of the prosperity that's going to hit, this will be an area that will actually industrialize quite a little bit. So then it's going to be seen as kind of a good idea. But again, this does help in creating some various public works projects. See here, by the way, one of the things done by the PWA is things that were created, like, for example, the Pine City Village Hall. They're going to put this plaque there to kind of commemorate it. That still exists today. This, by the way, a sign showing the construction site of a PWA site. And if you look at this map, you can see really that the works of the PWA will stretch across the entire country. Okay, farmers are something I've kind of, but I decided it'd be best to kind of talk about the plight of farmers altogether. So first off, remember that going back to after World War I, farmers have been super overproducing. During World War I, it was fine. There were all those mouths to feed that were soldiers. There was all the trade coming in to the Allied side. But after World War I ends, that's really not necessary. And so what's happened instead is that they're still overproducing, thus leading to very low prices for our farmers. And so farmers are going to be extremely angry as they really are not sharing in any wealth of the nation, even during the 1920s. And then when the Great Depression hits, this problem becomes even worse. Farms are foreclosed on as farmers can't make their mortgages. And to be honest, huge anger, huge outrage across a lot of our rural parts of the country. So, in order to kind of fix this, FDR through the New Deal is going to create specific programs aimed directly at farmers. One of those programs, excuse me, the Farm Credit Administration. This gives loans to farmers, especially in regards to mortgages, so they can afford their mortgages and be able to pay off and not have any more foreclosures. And then the biggest New Deal program dealing with farmers is going to be the AAA, which is the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. And this program does a couple things. Number one, it establishes base prices for crops. So basically saying, hey, these crops get X amount of dollars or, cents, therefore establishing a baseline price where farmers can actually profit. And then the big thing that the AAA does, which is going to be semi-controversial, is they're going to tell farmers, hey, as long as you're overproducing, the price of crops is going to remain too low. So you need to stop growing on all your land. So actually what the AAA is going to do is it's going to pay farmers to stop growing on their entire land. This is controversial for a few reasons. One of the biggest reasons that you want to realize is this is still the Depression. There are still people going hungry. So the fact that you're going to have people not grow during times of hunger is obviously a very, very serious problem. It's also unfair for blacks, in particular sharecroppers, because what will happen is the farmer will tell the sharecropper not to farm on that specific plot of land. And so the farmer still gets the money, but then it's the sharecropper that suffers. Same thing with a tenant farmer. It'd be the same kind of dynamic that comes into play here. But, it will help bring prices up. A couple other things will get passed after, which are going to be the Soil Conservation Act in 1936. This is going to tell farmers, hey, you can reduce the amount that you farm, not only for not farming, but we'll also pay you to grow soil conserving crops. So like soybeans, for example. Soybeans replenish the soil, so that's all good stuff. So we'll still pay you to do that. That way, at least they're not wasting food. The second AAA is passed in 1938. Similarly, trying to make some adjustments in order to, get restrictions on what people are growing. So this one will target specific crops that were in excess as opposed to just kind of a moratorium all the way together. When we think about the AAA, both the first and second, as well as these other programs for farmers, there are some successes. It's not perfect, but food prices will rise and farmers will get a little bit of a bigger share of the national wealth of the United States. Still tough to be a farmer, no question about it, but at least it's better than what it was before. By the way, some posters here that you're going to see about the AAA basically trying to convince people to stop growing so much and conserve. And you see that here as well. Let's conserve it. Okay, briefly, I want to talk about Native Americans who are also going to see something new come out of them for the New Deal. John Collier is going to be FDR's right-hand man as the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. And if you recall, the last time we saw Native Americans, they were under the Dawes Act, which basically forced them to assimilate into American culture through American schools, had stripped away most of their land, all the rest of these type of things. So in 1934, FDR is going to organize the Indian Reorganization Act, which actually will be dubbed the Indian New Deal. And what it's going to do is it's going to have Native Americans reorganize under local self-government. And it's also going to put into place things to preserve the Native American culture. So if you recall, the last time the government saw Native Americans, they tried to get them to become American, quotes, by having them cut their hair and going to American schools and those type of things. And now that's going to be stripped away. Some tribes will not accept this and are going to be angry at this idea, but most tribes will comply and will reorganize under the Indian Reorganization Act. Not perfect by any means, but at least a little something in order to, get things on the right track. Next program I want to mention is the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Reason it's going to be created is because the electric power industry is going to very much be growing during the early 1900s. However, it was extremely expensive. And this is going to be something that's going to really catch the attention of the FDR and the New Dealers as they think, hey, there's got to be a better way for us to give people electric power without charging so much money. So they're going to look to Tennessee, big area for them to be able to construct dams and electrical power sources, and also a place that was definitely suffering in poverty. So they would certainly benefit from a program like this. They're going to be able to determine the electric power price because the companies that were operating electric power before this were saying, oh, yeah, we know it's expensive, but that's just what it costs. The government's going to say, I don't think so. This just seems very, very high. So they're going to get a better price point. And then what they're going to be able to do is with cheaper rates, because they're able to figure it out, they're going to provide electrical power to the state and surrounding states, as well as provide employment constructing these things to people that desperately needed it in the state of Tennessee. TVA definitely significant because not only does it do all this, it's also going to transform the Tennessee area industrially as it becomes much more kind of successful. Here, by the way, another logo commemorating and showing the seal here of the Tennessee Valley Authority. See here a map, by the way, of all the places that the Tennessee Valley Authority will provide electrical power to. And you can see here it's not just the state of Tennessee. See, it stretches to the north into Kentucky, the south into Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, even into North Carolina and Virginia. So again, this is definitely a very significant program that's going to help bring industry and power to people that desperately need it. Okay, when we talk about reform, we're talking about programs that are really meant to be much more long lasting and to prevent another depression from ever happening again. So, some of these programs, so for example, I already mentioned one, the FDIC, the insurance of bank deposits, something that still exists today in order to prevent bank failures and get people feeling more confident about their deposits into banks. A big one that's going to be created because of the kind of malpractices occurring on the stock market is going to be the Securities Exchange Commission, the SEC. See the logo here, but basically this is designed to be the watchdog of the stock market and kind of look out for any suspicious activity. What the SEC also requires is that companies are honest when they report their gains and losses. So in this way, there's a better kind of feel for how a company is actually doing, so their number can be made up accordingly, so it's not just so much speculation. Yeah, there's always some, but because of that, you're going to really be able to prevent some of the really, really bad speculation from going on. And then another thing is that, remember, one of the things that people were doing to kind of manipulate price on the stock market was that they would all invest when it was super low, then they'd shoot the price up, then they'd all sell when it was at the top, then the price would come crashing down. No more of that. Okay, you can't do that anymore. That's illegal, by the way, today if you do that stuff on the stock market. So that can't happen either as well. So these are all things that the SEC does, and again, still exists today, in order to make sure that the stock market is an honest place of trading, but it's not a place of malpractice or anything like that. FHA, the Federal Housing Authority, this is something that still exists today that provides home loans to people. And what's good about FHA loans is they require less of a down payment, so it makes the home buying process a little more affordable. Still expensive, but not nearly as bad. And then another one is the USHA, the U.S. Housing Authority. And what this is actually going to do is it's going to decrease the slum areas of the major cities. And for the first time since really the growth of the cities dating back to the late 1800s, we will see a big decrease and a big decline in the slum parts of the city. Logo here of the SEC. This, by the way, is Martha Stewart, the famed chef, homemaker, whatever else. And she actually got caught by the SEC about 10-ish years ago because she sold a bunch of stocks of a company, and then the next day the stocks went down substantially. So the SEC caught wind. It was a lot of money. Realized she had insider information that caused her to sell. That's illegal, so she went to jail. So again, the SEC punishing anyone that doesn't play by the rules of the stock market, including, I guess, in this point, a celebrity. Here we see the Federal Housing Administration for the FHA, Better Housing Program. Again, the FHA still exists today, so here's a look at some of the ways in which they lend people money. And what I think is really significant to kind of consider here is this makes home buying more affordable for kind of like middle class people that might not necessarily have the best credit, might not necessarily have the most amount of money. So that's significant also there as well. USHA, again, the major goal here to cross out the slums. One of the major reform programs that still exists today is going to be Social Security. And this creation is going to be a pretty big deal. But what Social Security is going to do when it's created in 1935 is basically create unemployment insurance. So if people, don't have jobs, they can get something. But more importantly, what Social Security is going to do is it's going to provide money for people that retire. So this way they can have something upon their retirement and not have to work basically till they're dead. The way in which Social Security receives their money is through a payroll tax paid by both the employer and the employee. And so, for example, if you have a job, you pay into Social Security. But the idea is that when you retire, you'll have access to Social Security. And then at that point, you won't be paying into it. So an interesting way to see it. The initial Social Security also has coverage for people with disabilities. So, for example, like people that are blind can get money through Social Security. Today, that list of disabilities has been substantially increased. But the idea here is that this is the government providing for people that either can't work because of old age or can't work because they have a specific disability that's preventing them from being able to do so. There's going to be opposition to Social Security, as there's going to be a fear by many that this is a big government handout, and how dare the American government be giving out such this big thing to the American people. This is like socialism and other things like that. People should just take care of themselves. But there's many that are going to see this as really being a necessary step. It's not a perfect program. In order to qualify for Social Security, you actually have to have a job that pays a paycheck. And that means that certain jobs, even today, do not qualify for Social Security. In the 1930s, those jobs are particularly like, for example, sharecroppers. They don't get coverage under Social Security. Domestic maids, other type of workers, some like farm workers will not get it. So those are a lot of women, blacks, Mexicans who are not going to be able to get coverage under Social Security. But either way, the decision in the 1930s, 1935, to create a program in order to provide some type of safety net for people is going to be a big, big change from what the United States had done previously. Here's FDR signing Social Security into law. Here, by the way, an initial advertisement about Social Security for older people. And this, by the way, is kind of the way it works. You contribute through your paycheck as well as through your employer. And that's the vast majority of money that goes into the Social Security pool. And then you can see all the people that receive it. And again, you can see that although 15% goes to people that are disabled, the vast majority go to retirees. So that's still the way it works. I want to wrap up today by talking about one last major thing that's going to happen for the New Deal, which is a major victory for labor. So, um, we mentioned a few minutes ago the NRA will fail, doesn't work, but there was still a feeling that something needed to be done in order to make sure that labor was protected. That will be seen through the creation of the Wagner Act. Wagner Act is going to lead to a new National Labor Relations Board, which is going to give once again the right of labor to organize in unions. And most importantly for that, just like the NRA, give them the ability to pick representatives to bargain on their behalf. So, again, this is a big victory for American workers who wanted to make sure that the people representing them in union negotiations, collective bargaining, were people that they chose specifically. We're going to see that with this kind of boost for workers, unskilled workers are going to start to organize themselves. We know they've been having some trouble doing that. And their major union is going to be the CIO, or the Committee for Industrial Organization. They're actually going to team up with the automobile workers, and they will receive recognition actually from General Motors into being the legitimate union for the auto workers. So this is going to be a big victory for them as it becomes the sole bargaining agency for the GM employees. Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 will once again, give another big boost to labor. And this is going to establish a minimum wage for workers, 40 cents an hour, if you can believe that, and then a 40-hour maximum work week. So if you work above that, you're eligible for overtime pay and things like that. So that's, again, another big step. It's also going to be the Fair Labor Standards Act that's going to eliminate child labor, saying that children under 16 cannot work. And then if it's an industry that's could be considered dangerous, you have to be at least 18 to work there. So finally, takes all the way up to 1938 to get a significant provision to eliminate child labor. Workers happy with FDR. In general, the American people happy with FDR. And what we're going to see is that FDR will be easily elected in 1936 as President of the United States once again. So really, really kind of a high point. And certainly you've seen this. Not every New Deal program is successful, but they are mostly successful. So that's really, really important. But more important than that is that it's at least better than what was going on before. It is at least giving some degree of relief, some degree of recovery, and some degree of reform to Americans. This, by the way, is taking a look at the Fair Labor Standards Act in 2013 at the 75th anniversary. We see here, obviously, that minimum wage has been significantly increased, but there's still obviously moves to increase the minimum wage. In LA and other areas, it's the move to the 15, trying to make $15 an hour the minimum wage. Again, in 1938, it was 40 cents. Here, by the way, is a look at our CIO partnering up with the United Automobile Workers. This is actually the CIO and the automobile workers participating in a sit-in. So this is when actually, instead of striking outside, they just wouldn't work, but they'd stay in. And this would prevent the hiring of strike breakers. So actually a relatively significant tactic. Here, by the way, a look at the electoral map in 1936. You can see here, huge, huge victory for Roosevelt. Only 2 states gained by the Republican Alf Landon. And we can see here that even by 1936, in the popular vote, over 60% for FDR. People like the direction the New Deal is going. And even though it certainly has not been perfect, it still provided a lot of good stuff for the American people. Okay, so just a couple things for you to look at. If you go to Google Chat, I just have two kind of prompts I'd like everyone to answer. Which New Deal program do you think was the most successful? Which New Deal program do you think was the least successful? Just want to see kind of what people are thinking, get some conversation, stimulate, and stuff like that. And then next class we have on Friday, 8:23, brief lecture. I'm serious. Sorry if this is a little long, but a lot of bulk. Hopefully, is fun for you, and we'll wrap up the New Deal, talk about how it ends, and then we'll spend the majority of the time talking about kind of how we should judge the New Deal. Assessing its effectiveness, where was it strong, where did it do what it needed to do, where did it fall short, and we'll take a look at that. Thanks again for being here. Please answer the prompts on Google Chat. Any questions, let me know and we can talk about it. And thanks again for being a part of the action.